It's in times of crisis a leader is tested. It's in moments like these, throughout history, leaders have risen to the occasion, put forward bold ideas like the New Deal. History reflects well on our leaders who have stood up to corruption and who have declared that the buck stopped at them. But history, recent history especially, also just depicts people in positions of leadership using their platform for personal political ambitions during times of crisis. Now, don't get me wrong. Being a responsive governor and an ambitious governor do not have to be mutually exclusive. But when there is a leadership vacuum, especially in New York, the media capital of the world, and now the center of the COVID crisis in the United States, when there is a leadership vacuum, and in New York, the president's home, where you also have politics at its finest, there is a prime opportunity for a strong, articulate, calming force to declare what's real and what's not, to declare what needs to be done, to just show up and admit that shit's bad, to appear to take charge, and to point at the foe of most New Yorkers, President Donald Trump. Now, let's be real. New Yorkers, we love a good fight. We love the brutal honesty. We love the spicy political bickering between politicians and sometimes the press. We love those saucy New York Post headlines, even if we're ashamed to admit it. But if there's one thing we have learned in the last few years, not all New Yorkers love Governor Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo can appear great when it's all about him, when he is unchallenged by someone who exposes his flaws, when he doesn't have to navigate and work with political factions, when he doesn't have to pass a budget or respond to activists and donors at the same time. Now, someone who actively sought a challenger to Andrew Cuomo in 2018 and who campaigned, spoke out, and organized for the brilliant Cynthia Nixon, I even found myself charmed and a little bit transfixed by Governor Cuomo during the first days of his press conferences. But I always like a little bit of a charming, take-charge Italian guy, especially one who has a good relationship with his mom. But admittedly, I was even slightly swayed by the performance of New Jersey Hurricane Sandy hero Chris Christie during the GOP debates. Did you see the Republican fools that he was running against? Anybody would look good against them who took charge. But he was, of course, later tanked by his own corruption Bridgegate scandal. And who, of course, can forget Giuliani during 9/11? It's not like we didn't know then what we know now. All you have to do is pick up any of New York journalist Wayne Barrett's books. The facts were in front of us the whole time, if we only bothered to look for them. Now, moments of crisis were made for these sociopathic authoritarian types to swoop in and take the lead and take charge. I mean, history literally shows us this. But especially if they have good political instincts. And in case of Governor Cuomo, can add a little staged humility and self-deprecating humor to soften the pain of the sharp knives stabbing you repeatedly in the back. Now, if you aren't aware of Andrew Cuomo's sociopathy, let me remind you of a few of his greatest hits. Andrew Cuomo is bad with women. When facing questions about not protecting women who experienced sexual harassment or assault in New York State government, a well-respected female reporter was told by him that you don't understand and you do a disservice to all women. And this was all happening while his puppets in the IDC blocked codifying Roe v. Wade in New York State, angering most feminists and women's groups. Have you heard about the IDC? Do you know what this is? So it was one of Cuomo's brilliant Clintonian triangulation schemes. The IDC, the Independent Democratic Conference, was a group of 8 state senators elected in Democratic districts who then went to Albany and literally caucused with Republicans, voting with them in exchange for financial perks, leadership positions, and, of course, bigger offices. So how did that affect New York? Well, instead of being a totally Democratic state, we had a Republican state Senate that blocked anything that leaned to the left of Pat Buchanan because of the IDC. And then Cuomo didn't have to look bad. He could continue to claim to be a progressive, not getting caught vetoing bills like codifying Roe v. Wade or protecting undocumented immigrants or the New York Health Act or voting reforms, criminal justice reform, or campaign finance reform, just to name a few. The IDC was his foil, designed by Cuomo to make him look like the good guy so he could someday claim to be progressive while running for president in the Democratic primary. But in the era of Donald Trump, New Yorkers woke up. They weren't buying it and organized. and almost all the IDC members were voted out by their activist-backed challengers in 2018. The IDC died, and the state Senate is now in control of Cuomo's Democratic enemies. Seriously, his own party members are his worst enemies in the state that he represents that's Democratic. Now, Cuomo also claims to have passed sweeping progressive legislation like free college or the SAFE Act, which is gun reform, both of which are extremely watered down. In the case of free college, even Senator Bernie Sanders himself was convinced, appearing on camera with Cuomo in support when it was passed. The free college program applies to a small percentage of New Yorkers who have to qualify and follow strict guidelines even after graduating, or they face the risk of losing that funding and having to pay for school years later. Cuomo took triangulation to another level, finding the most creative ways to appear to be progressive while taking the same real estate developer and charter school money that the New York Republicans and their IDC cronies took. But wait, there's more. During Governor Cuomo's first successful campaign for governor, he also ran in 2000 before he was attorney general, and he lost. So when he ran for his first successful campaign for governor, he ran in the midst of a massive corruption sweep in New York state government. So he famously campaigned against corruption, and once he took office, he established the Moreland Commission to investigate public corruption. But then, poof, magically, the commission was abruptly shut down in the midst of many investigations, one which landed right in his executive office. What was the result? Even after the Moreland Commission was shut down, U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara continued many of the investigations, including investigating the Buffalo billion-dollar scheme that led to his closest senior advisor and claimed other brother, Joe Percoco, to prison for corruption, coming out of his office, Governor Cuomo's office. Now, just yesterday, Cuomo moved the presidential primary to June to coincide with the congressional primary. When I was on the Unity Reform Commission, the DNC Unity Reform Commission, we unanimously advised all the primary deadlines and dates in New York to be consolidated. It had the most complicated system in the country, and we advised that they become uncomplicated so people knew how to vote and when to vote and how to register. But some of this had to be decided by the party, the Democratic Party that Governor Cuomo undemocratically runs. In New York, which has the second lowest voter turnout in the country, despite being a Democratic state, just above Republican Louisiana. In New York, the state Democratic Party is controlled by Governor Cuomo, and they were refusing electoral reforms that would grow the party. The governor has used his slate appointments through his appointed party leadership to control the party rules and access. It is not a party easy for progressives to take over when the rules are written to keep them out. Does that sound familiar? Which brings me to today. While Governor Cuomo is busy charming Jezebel writers and exhausted moms during his daily press conferences, behind the scenes, when the cameras are off, the lights are off, he is actually pushing for austerity through Medicaid cuts. For real. He is refusing to accept $6.7 billion in federal funding to help New Yorkers in a time of crisis because he wants to slice up and tinker with Medicaid. He wants to slice up Medicaid to fit his fiscal budget. You know, instead of taxing the 0.1% in New York, he would rather cut Medicaid while thousands of New Yorkers are dying and being hospitalized during COVID. He would rather reward his cronies while we are all distracted with our own personal crises and health and entertained by his squabbles with Trump and his nightly mama's boy shtick with his brother on CNN. Sociopathic. Let me tell you, dating a mama's boy type, it might be fun for a minute when you don't know better, but you never want to marry one. Andrew Cuomo is not our friend, and he sure as hell should not be president. Cuomo, even in a time of crisis, is willing to find ways to protect the biggest corporations and wealthiest people in New York at the expense of sick and hurting New Yorkers. He would sell New York City to another country if it meant he could balance his budget. Remember that the next time he's making a joke about his latest fishing trip with his brother.